Welcome to Suits and Sneakers, a series featuring sage advice and candid conversations with seasoned leaders from diverse backgrounds and styles. I'm your host, Carrie Tuttle. With my guests, we deep dive into areas of team engagement, motivation, and effective performance management. Get ready to be inspired and transform your approach to leadership. Please like, subscribe, or follow to be notified when future episodes are released. Let's get started. Good afternoon. Today I have with me Sean Stratton, a seasoned technology leader who has worked in many industries from oil and gas to financial services and the legal sector. Much of his career has been focused on driving change and modernization in the companies he works for. He's also talented at aligning IT strategy with executive leadership goals. Sean, welcome to Suits and Sneakers.
Hello, Carrie. Wonderful to talk to you today. Like you said, I've had an interesting career. I actually knew growing up, I didn't know what I wanted to do as an adult, but I knew I didn't want to do what my father did, and that was work in IT. So I went to university to be a teacher, and in my last year at university, got a chance through a sons and daughters summer program where my dad worked, actually, get an interesting job in tech. For the gray-haired people in the room, I was actually unloading and loading a laser printer for most of the day and loading mainframe backup tape. So that's how far back it was. I figured out during that summer that, hey, there was actually a whole bunch of stuff that had to do with IT that had nothing to do with programming like my father did. And that was the start of how I ended up where I am today. And my entire IT career has really been focused on the people side of IT as opposed to the technical side. There are a few technical things I had to do along the way, but really it was focused on the people side of IT, which was a nice segue when I decided that I really wanted to get into people leadership. So, I've worked in my early days of my career. I worked rolling out, some of the early personal computers in a regulated utility. So I was there for about 7 or 8 years and then decided, I really want to take the next step in my career. And I was not going to be able to do that there. One of these things with these regulated companies is it's very slow moving, and I was a little more aggressive with my career than that. So I got an opportunity to move into the financial services sector, and that was my first people leadership job. Would I love to say that every single thing I did in that job as my first leadership role was a success? Absolutely not. Some of the most valuable lessons I learned were because of brutal mistakes I made, and then in hindsight went, wow, let's never do that way again. I stayed there for a few years. Then it was the .com era, and we were all going to get, all us tech people wanted to go work for the .com companies, and we were going to get our stock options, and we were all going to get rich, and it was just, that was going to be the rest of our career. And I certainly, again, got to learn a lot of valuable lessons around how to lead people. Turns out the street wasn't paved with gold, and those stock options never ended up, being worth anything. But interestingly, even in that role, I was in IT for a good portion of the time I was there. But as the company evolved, the senior leadership said, Sean, the things we need you to do to lead people and organize and build process, we actually need you to now come out of IT and do that in some of the more operational parts of the business. So I did that for a while. Then after that company, it was time to move on. I went from there into the oil and gas sector and spent 15 years, I guess, dealing with growth at oil and gas and an international company. And I'll tell you, it's one thing to work in a one-office company and try and deal with company culture there. But when you work with a company that has offices in multiple parts of Canada and the United States, trying to lead while dealing with different cultures, boy, that's a big deal. And at one point, my team, they obviously didn't all directly report to me, but at one point my team there was over 200 people, and it was in 4 cities. Well, if you're not going to live
Wow.
on an airplane, how do you build relationships? Because that's, for me, a whole bunch of leadership is on building the relationships. How do you build relationships if you're not flying all over all the time? And by the way, this was before days of Teams and stuff like that. The first video phones were first coming out. I think Skype was just coming around. So there was a lot of interesting things to learn about leading from a distance. And I'll be honest, many of those things that I learned leading from a distance at that company, they were then very valuable when, COVID happened. And because we split the team in half, there were members of my team that I didn't see in person for 2 years. So,
Wow.
so how do you continue to move a company forward? And again, that was a time of big technology change. I was in a meeting with a bunch of people shortly before COVID happened, we were all starting to talk about what's our team's role going to be like, and this is a CIO roundtable where we met regularly. And when we met 2 months into COVID, our 1 year plan to roll out teams was done. We're like, okay, rapid technology change, but to be able to do that remotely and then deal with people change management certainly had some interesting experiences as well. And then most recently I've been in the legal sector, and because lawyers bill by the hour, in fact they bill by every 6 minutes, it drives some very, very different behaviors than I've seen in any other business. So again, how do you deal with things like people change management when you've got a whole chunk of your audience saying, okay, I will read your email if it is 10 lines or less, or I have very little time for this. So how do you do things like people change management and organizational change management in micro capsules, because that's all you're going to get. So that's kind of where I've gone. I started, it started out in old technology, did some time as an individual contributor, and then starting in the late 90s, moved into I'll be honest, my first leadership role was I was a manager. I was not a leader. I didn't even understand the difference at the time. Over the course of the next number of years, I really transitioned into these leadership roles, whether it's leading transformation in terms of understanding what a business needs and translating that into ICT strategy, or the part that I love the most of anything to do with this whole leadership journey is people development, seeing someone that has some potential and take them and help that seed germinate and grow. And that's just been my biggest passion, is this whole growing talent and growing people. So I think that's kind of the story of Sean.
Wow. Okay. That gives me a ton of material. I think that we could take this conversation in many directions that people would be interested in. And I think it might be great to go back to your point about the difference between managing people and leading, because it's pretty easy for us to think we're doing one or the other. What do you see as the difference?
And there's lots of management quotes that have been around for decades around managers and leaders. I'm not going to bother with any of that. Anyone can read those books. For me, so much of leadership is setting a direction, figuring out a direction that a department, a team, a person needs to go, and then instead of giving them the path, say this is where we need to get to. What are the mental tools that they need, whether it's the skills or what are the tools they need to be able to get there? Make sure they've got those, or you help them develop those, and then basically just keep them between the sides of the fairway, not telling them this is your next task. It's like, okay, it's all about questions. Why are you doing this? Where are you going with that? Why are you doing that? I actually have a book on my bookshelf that's called The Power of Why, and it's all around removing barriers, building skills, and asking questions instead of just saying, do this, do this, do this. That's, to me, that's a big part of leading a team versus managing a team.
Yeah. And because you've spent most of your career with technical type people, like people who have technical skills, let's
Yes.
put it that way, what do you think are some of the things that technical leaders miss?
So first off, I always encourage people, if you've got someone who's a highly skilled technical resource and they're not a great communicator, don't try and force them to. Like, there are some things that some people just aren't good at, and so you make sure you take advantage of their technical talents without forcing them to try and be an extrovert or a strong communicator, and maybe you pair them with someone. So part of the deal is, yes, you want to give people skills and you want to develop them, but you also don't want to try and force someone into your image of what they should be. So you'll recognize where people's strengths and weaknesses are. Some people, like I think of an employee I worked with one time, very, very good at their job. But if we had ever told him, go up to the executive floor and deal with this executive, that would have been the end of his career. But he was really good at the technical part of his job. So the key is, look at people and recognize this is their strength or this is their weakness. Does it mean you don't try and develop communication skills? Of course you do. I can't count the number of people I've sent off to public speaking, some people to project management. I've certainly been parts of teams that went through things like the pro-site change management process to try and get all that. So you don't ignore and not try and develop, but also realize not everyone is going to be the strong people communicator or executive communicator, and you let those people take advantage of their strong technical skills.
Definitely. And when someone steps into leadership as maybe a technical leader, um, how can they sort of get a sense for where should they focus their attention when it comes to leading a team?
So, especially for people that have a technical background, the tendency, and I know I did this when I was in my first leadership role when I had moved to the financial services company, the tendency is to try and show, the rest of the team how good you are as a leader by showing your technical expertise. Unless your
Hmm.
role is technical architect or something, that's not where you need to be putting your skills, and you're actually, you're doing your team and yourself a disservice if that's where you try and focus. That's where really as a new leader who's been a technical person and now boom, now I've got a team to lead. First thing you need to do is, and by the way, I'm going to say, reflect a long time before you start making decisions. That's also been one of my lessons. And when I look at my most recent employer, when I joined them, I had put together a plan of what my first 90 days were going to be. And by the way, one of the commitments right on the top line was zero changes of any sort during the first 90 days. Because until then, I don't know what's going on. Why would I make a change maybe to something that worked in a previous job or a previous company, but I don't know this company yet. So as a new leader, really, your first period of time is ask questions, learn, and then maybe you poke a little deeper there. Why are we doing this or why are we doing that? But you have to first of all understand this is what the business needs, but you also need to learn this is what makes my people tick. So I've actually had a process I've done where when I'm new to it, leading a team, after a period of time, I actually have a thing where I reach out to them and say, okay, you and I are going to have a one-on-one meeting at such and such a time, and I want you to tell me. So we'll pretend, Carrie, you're my new employee, and I'm your new leader, and I would say, Carrie, when we meet, I want first off for you to tell me the 5 things you need from me, and then the 5 things that you want to tell me. So that way I can understand what is it that makes that person, like what's their communication style, what will make them thrive. Because just because I have my style, there are lots of people who are like, oh my God, I wish Sean would just shut up. He tells his stories all the time and he's long-winded. So I've had to learn for some people that my raging extrovert, outgoing, love to, like, I always love when I start a meeting, if there's dead airspace, it drives me mental. So I'm always like, oh, how's the weather? And are you in Cincinnati? Oh, how's the weather in Cincinnati today, or something like that. Other people are like, why
Hmm.
can't Sean just shut up and let us have some quiet for a change? So you need to learn their styles, because what works for you isn't nearly as important as what works for the people you're trying to lead. Because if you can't connect with them, then how are you going to lead them? Then all you're going to end up having to do is direct them.
Yeah, absolutely. It really goes back to empathy and really just listening to understand rather than
Yes.
listening to try and solve a problem. But I'm curious too, like with your employer, when you presented your 90-day plan, how did they respond to the idea that I'm not making any changes?
They actually were very supportive of it because I was new to the industry. They didn't know me very well yet. Like I think for that particular job, I know I did many interviews, but interviewing is partly an act. Like everyone's playing a part, and so you're playing a part to try and answer the questions they want in their interview the way they want, and all those types of things. And they're trying to play a part to show that the company is a great company. So, while I'm not saying we don't do job interviews, of course we have to. Job interviews are all an act, and we play a role a certain way. So that meant in those first 90 days, if I came in and just started swinging a bat around and things like that, they're like, Sean, you just broke a whole bunch of china that we didn't even think needed to be broken. So they were responsive. And interestingly, one of my team members told me that they had a secret meeting before I started, and they kind of had an informal poll to see how long, because they hadn't seen my plan yet, to see how long it was going to be before I started changing to do things the way I had done it at previous companies, just because I had done it at previous companies. I actually eventually came right out and admitted that part to me.
Wow. Well, you know what I like though is the fact that when you have a 90-day plan like that, you're clearly setting expectations, but also it gives you an opportunity to check in with
Mhm.
people there, like either senior leaders or team members to say, what do you see in the plan before just forging forward and making changes without appearing to have any thought or strategy in why you're making those changes. So I love that. I think that's a really smart thing to do.
One of the things that if you had any of my, people that worked on my teams over the last 15 years or so, if you said, have you ever heard Sean say this? They'd be like, oh, we're tired of hearing it. So I try and lead, and I do it consciously to say, I'm the dumbest person in the room. Help me understand where we need to go. And that way, again, you never want your leader, the team leader, to be the kind of hub where everything has to happen. They should actually be the one that's most easy to lift out and replace. I had a boss a number of years ago that said, Sean, I would hope that the team would work better when I'm on my days off because I'm not here disrupting you guys and asking all these crazy questions. And I've taken that's one of the lessons, life lessons along the way that I've taken to heart is the team should be clear enough on the direction. They should have the tools, like I say, the skills, so that the days that I'm off, they're like, oh, thank goodness, we can finally get some work done because Sean's not asking all those silly questions.
Yeah, I love that. I got a funny question for you.
Okay.
What's your tech peeve? Do you know what I mean by that? It's like pet peeve, but like a tech peeve. And maybe it's to do with leadership, maybe not.
I'd say my biggest tech peeve is chasing the latest shiny ball. And I joke, like, I'm an IT leader. You think I would be the one that has to have the newest iPhone, or I would have been the one that knew about ChatGPT first. I, as the leader, actually try to be the one, the slow mover, so that we're not, running around like squirrels. So when someone's like, "Oh, I've got to have the new shiny toy," and then the next week I have to have another new shiny toy, that makes me mental.
Yeah, I can see that.
And also technology just for the sake of automating. Like you look at companies say, this process is really slow. Okay, well, we found a system that can do it better for us. Cool. Just like you don't do manual payroll anymore, you have an HRIS system. But then you go to put in the system, it's like, well, but that's not the way we do that here at our company. That's right. But you buy the system to do it the system's way, unless there's a specific legal reason or something why you cannot, to try and take an imperfect process, make it more efficient with technology, but then say, but we want the technology to do it the way we've always done it. What's the point of that?
Right, right. Well, and maybe that leads to my next question, which is really intended for non-technical leaders. What should they consider or keep in mind as it relates to technology?
So I'm gonna guess actually the answer in many ways is the same. Because as a technology leader, again, I was never the technical architect. I would say my job was to be a leader most of the time, not a technology leader. So first off is you have to understand what the business needs of your business function. So if you're leading an accounting function, if you're leading an HR function, if you're leading a marketing function, what is the business need of that? So that's the first thing, because that's why you're there. That helps you understand. And then again, you go back to what do your people need. So when it comes to, so say you're an accounting manager and you're like, I think we could do better if we had an accounting system. Perfect. But what will mess up non-technical leaders is, and it's, it used to be the magazine in the back of the seat in the airplanes that had all the stuff. Your CEO would come back with a thing and say, I read this article about this new system and we need to put it in. Well, those have pretty much gone away. A lot of it's YouTube now, but now, like, it's trade shows. A bunch of your executives go off to a trade show and they come back and they're like, okay, I saw this system, we need to put it in place. Assuming you have a sensible, good relationship with the IT department, then what you really should be saying is, here's the thing I need to accomplish. Let's work together to try to figure out how to accomplish this. And I threw in a concept there that I think is really important is IT is notorious for saying anything that has to do with a computer is my realm. And like, put up this big wall and we're not going to let non-IT people into the IT department. We're going to have locks on the doors and on and on and on. That was true back in the mainframe days. That is no longer true anymore. Technology has become democratized, and IT is there absolutely to partner with anyone who needs the technology, and not to say, I'm the technical expert, and I'm the only one that can make these decisions. You can have those relationships, but they're very confrontational and unrewarding for everyone. It's a lot better as a leader, both on the IT side and the non-IT side, to say, okay, we're in this together. How do we get there? And this whole, this whole deal about I'm solely in charge of this function, and IT, maybe you can give me a system, that hurts everybody.
Yeah, for sure it does. So I know you've mentored young leaders in the past. What would you say your approach is to, or your philosophy about leadership?
And by the way, you just hit on one of my favorite things. Like, mentoring and developing leaders is what truly fills my emotional cup. That's what makes me the happiest, is doing that. And so the first thing is, okay, what are they trying to accomplish in their career, in their job, in their life? What do they want to be? Because if you're going to mentor them and help them grow, it has to be in the direction they want. Not Nobody ever needs to follow my path to where I got to. It's, where do you want to go? You also need to understand their style. Because again, everyone's going to have a different style. And
Mhm.
one of the best pieces of advice I got when I first started mentoring is, you're not there to tell them the answers. If you're going to develop people, you lead them through the discussions that help them figure out the answers. Because if all you're doing is saying,
Mhm.
so say you've got someone that's having a hard time getting IT and business aligned. If all you do is say, well, go build a roadmap, and this is what it has to look like, and go do this and go do that, you're not mentoring them. You're just handing them the playbook. The job of mentoring is to develop their own skills so that they independently can do it on their own. You're there to help them grow, not to be their like dedicated teacher.
Um, I get that. I think that any coach would be giving this a similar idea. Here's the question I have though.
Okay,
What if the person you're mentoring has no idea that a roadmap even exists? How do you help guide them towards the tools that will help them take an easier path rather than fighting through and building experience without then having a mentor?
so
You know what I
you're
mean?
right. There are some times in a mentorship journey where you do want to put on your teacher hat. There are some times where it's like, okay, we can spend the next 6 months long walking you to this epiphany, or you can say, when I was in your shoes, or when I was in a similar situation, here's an approach or response, or something like that has worked for me. Let's talk about whether or not that would be a fit for you, and how you could see that working. So you're right. There are some times you have to
There you
put on your teacher hat. There's another thing that I find, and maybe it's just a Seanism, but I really like when I'm working with someone, especially in a mentorship role. I like the Myers Briggs test. There are many, many types of personality tests, but I love them, and I know a bunch of people do them. Like, well, that was complete hokum. I answered all those questions, and the analysis of me is totally wrong. Like, well, no, the analysis is based on how you answered the question. It's been done enough times that it's fairly accurate. So either you either you didn't answer the question, or you're unaware of your own traits and styles, and that's okay. Why do I like them though? I like them because then it shows me where my blind spots are, because knowing your blind spots is really, really important. And it also helps other leaders know where their blind spots are. So, for instance, in Myers Briggs, I am a raging EFSJ, extrovert, feeling, sensing, judging. Most people are kind of up and downs and ups and downs. I peg the scale on those. I actually had someone I worked with for years who saw a Myers Briggs report sitting at a table one day for a team I was part of, and without even having seen the names, this person was able to say, "Oh, that's Sean." It also then helps the other person. So you can say, I make decisions quickly. I do them by my gut. I don't need 50 pieces of information. If you've got someone who's very
go.
analytical, they're not going to be able to make a decision without 50 pieces of information. So you need to understand that personality style. But oh, by the way, it also gives you a place to coach. So I had to learn, okay, my natural state is EFSJ. You know what, Sean? There's sometimes you actually need to learn how to do more detailed analysis to make a good decision. So you either can also help your mentee, your protege in that way, or say there's someone who is, like, say, very detailed and very, very analytical. Well, then you can help coach them to say, it's nice that you are this detail oriented, but as a leader, you're going to have to get very, very comfortable with making decisions with incomplete information. So let's start working on approaches to doing that, because that's one of the things that I see so often is, if you're going to be a leader, be prepared to have to make decisions with incomplete information. So you can help people if you understand, you've got a hyper analytical person, well, there's somewhere we can talk about.
Yeah. Well, and having a mentor is such a gift for pointing out not only those blind spots, but those tendencies that might hold us back in an area where we are leading other people. So it's great to have guidance in that way.
And I'll be very, very honest. I wasn't born with mentorship skills. I was very, very lucky that I was exposed to a leadership coach starting back in mid 2000, and actually was able to maintain that relationship with that executive coach or leadership coach through two different companies. She actually came and joined at the next company and was very, very involved in my self-awareness and my growth as a leader through the things she asked me and was able to develop me on. So it's not like I'm sitting here saying, "Hey, look at me. I'm a mentor and a leader, and I figured it all out on my own." Heck no, this has been a huge journey of learning. Remember, I said I started wanting to be a high school science teacher, so there's a little bit of innate behavior there anyway. But there is none of this that was just popped into my head one day. I've had a lot of strong leaders that were my leaders, and a lot of strong people that were able to coach me through my development.
Hmm. I know you talk too about being authentic as a leader. What does that mean to you?
If you try and lead in a style that isn't you, you might be able to fake it for a while, but it is going to cause you stress. And I would say your people are going to pick up on it pretty quickly. Like I said, I'm a talker. I have to be allowed to talk and ask questions and all that. If I was in a role where it was purely data based and stuff like that, and I wasn't able to do that, I would fail as a leader. And I certainly see, as I have left roles and moved on to a new role, I've given the advice more than once to my replacement: don't try and be Sean. You can't be Sean because I'm the only one that's me. You have to find a way to lead being whoever you are. So you have to lead from your style. Now, like I said, there are then things that are teachable, but if you're not a raging extrovert and you try and start telling stories at the beginning of every meeting like I do, it's going to be strained and awkward for everyone. So that part of that deal is, and that again, that's why I like some of that personality testing. But there's lots of ways. But if you try and lead in a way that is not you, it won't work for long.
So, Sean, I know when we're mentoring people, there's also a bit of an intention there. So, leaders often have some sort of, or should have some sort of succession plan in place. What is your point of view on that?
So I'm actually add two pieces here. I'm going to start with one thing to say. First of all, one of my rules about being a mentor is you can't be someone's mentor if you're in the chain of command. So if you report to me, I'm not your mentor. I can try
Hmm.
and develop skills and all that, but for me, and of course you try and want to develop people under you, but when I consider a formal mentorship relationship, it's someone who's not in your chain of command. Now, that being said, one of the responsibilities a leader has is what happens to the team or the company when I'm not there? And do you wait to start thinking about that until you're like, oh, you know what, I'm kind of getting tired of this company. I guess we need to figure out what we're going to do. If you're a leader, you are thinking about that all the time from the very beginning. Maybe there's someone in your team that's the succession plan. Maybe it's other people moving into those roles, but you have to be thinking all the time, what do we do in terms of what's next? And one of the biggest things is start having a plan. The plan may be imperfect. You may leave a company and they may go in a completely different direction than what your succession plan was, but I can guarantee you, even if they do go in a different direction, it's a very much better journey than to not have discussed it at all. And I remember very early on in a job about 15 years ago, that's when I started to say, because again, none of these things came naturally, what's the succession plan for this role and this role and this role? And it was the first time I'd been at a company that was evolved enough to say, oh, you're right. That person may not be there forever. And so that translated into, not only do you need to have thoughts about what we're going to do in the analogy always used to be, what if someone gets hit by a bus? Well, that's mean. We don't use that analogy anymore. So what if Joey wins the lottery and all of a sudden it's $10 million? What's the plan so that the company continues to work and the department continues to work? And I think as a leader, that's incumbent upon you as one of your responsibilities is, when I win the lottery 6 months from now and say, I'm not coming to work anymore, what happens to the team, or what's the plan? So it's a conscious thing. It's not just naturally going to occur and be innate to someone. It's actually something you need to be consciously thinking about, is what's the succession plan? And lots of
Mm.
times to develop those resources, if you find someone, and you'll often find like, hey, the most logical successor to me is that person over there. Well, maybe getting them to be able to replace you, that's not going to be a 6 month journey. And many times it's a multi-year journey if they've never been in a leadership role before, to start saying, okay, how would you develop strategy? What do you mean? So to have a good, especially if you're looking internally, instead of just that you're going to leave and they're going to hire a parallel move, then it's a multi-year journey to develop the skills for a successor. And again, if you don't have the plan, it's not going to happen.
Absolutely. And when you're thinking of succession planning, and let's say you have somebody internal in mind for the role, do you tell them that? Or what do you think is the best approach to start developing their skills into that role?
That's a great question, Carrie, because you can't just tell them. The first question is, here is what I am thinking about. Is this something that interests you? Because they might come back and say, this is no interest to me. And there are a lot of people that are like, oh heavens, do I ever want to be the IT director? Not a chance. So you can't force them. You don't want to do it covertly. So the first question is, do you actually, this is what I was thinking, are you interested? Then if the answer is yes, it's like, okay, this is where I think we need to go over the years in terms of skills development, and let's start coming up with a plan of how we're going to get there. But yeah, never mind, do you tell them? You better ask them first.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know you're always learning and growing. What are some of your sources for getting new ideas or for developing your own skills?
A couple of places. And YouTube, by the way, is not my number one source. I'll say part of the way that I have learned so much is by working my network. So early on in my career, there's a group in Calgary called KIPS. It was the Canadian Information Processing Society. I was active in that, so I was meeting all IT leaders from all across Calgary. Um, then eventually KIPS started to fold, but I've keep active through a lot of different avenues with IT leaders around Calgary. In fact, the people I'm talking to these days, as in this new phase of my career, a lot of the people are in Toronto, down in the southern states, but so much of my learning is talking to other leaders, asking questions, learning what challenges they're going through, learning their responses. And by the way, I like to feed back into that as well. But for me, it's a very people-centric knowledge network. I also read a whole bunch, but so much of my learning has been through, like say the people-centric network of colleagues in many different industries. Lots of them aren't even in IT, but that's been my biggest source, is a whole bunch of people that you feed from and you feed to. I,
Hmm.
I, I got
You
given
made
guidance
reference.
early. I got given guidance early in my career to build your network. And so often someone will be like, I'll have met someone through a co-op program or whatever, and they graduate high school or graduate university, and they're like, Sean, can we sit and talk about what should I be doing? How am I going to get this job? And how am I going to, like, number one thing, build a network. If you're fresh out of university, well, first off, keep in touch with a bunch of your grads as they go out. So maybe you're an engineer. Well, keep in touch with the other engineering grads. They're going to be your professional network as you move up through your career. Also, do the things like when someone says, hey, you're working with a new vendor, and they say, we're going to be running a session next Friday night at Salt Lick, and the CEO of the company is going to come and talk and explain our vision. Sometimes people are going to say, oh, that's so exhausting. And you know what? It can be. But that's how you continue to build your network, is doing those. You do the golf tournaments, and you do the social events with the suppliers that you work with, and you do the round tables with your professional network.
Hmm.
You have to
Yeah,
feed that
hugely
tree all the
valuable.
time.
Definitely. So speaking of which, you made reference to this next phase of your career. What are you working on these days?
So I have gotten to the stage in my life where working a full-time job has kind of run its course, And so now I'm moving on to a much more self-directed phase of my career. And funnily enough, I mentioned one of the things that really fills my emotional cup is mentoring. So I want to move into a phase of my career where, and I've done this, for a couple of people formally, although for free, for a few years. And like I said, that's how I know this is when I look at what really fills my emotional cup, people development, leader mentoring is what really fills my emotional cup. So that's a big part of the next phase of my career is, doing leader development and leader coaching. I primarily, there are many different styles. Some people like the big classroom sessions where you've got 50 people in there and you're running around. I prefer the more intimate one-on-one type style where it's very much a one-to-one relationship. And I think part of that comes from, again, this leadership coach that I mentioned that I had exposure to. A lot of my style I learned from how she approached it, and so that that's where my comfort zone is this one-on-one leadership, mentoring. So as people are either bosses are saying, I've got this person here that I think has potential, but they need a mentor, awesome, or someone who says, I'm in my first new leadership role and I think I need some help. Great, let's talk. So I'm doing a little bit of other consulting stuff as well. But if you want to talk about what's next to Phil Sean's emotional cup, I'm planning on starting to do some leadership mentoring.
Excellent, excellent. Well, that's amazing. Last question. What advice would you give to young Sean, your younger self, when you took on your first leadership role, now that you know what you know now?
This advice would be relevant for an awful lot of young Sean. Be patient. Be patient.
Oh, okay.
Everything doesn't have to happen this quickly. So certainly I always, it's like, okay, I want to get the next step. And so be patient. And that then got coupled midway through my career with a lesson, very, very valuable lesson that shaped basically the rest of my career is don't let your job be your identity. So I know so many people that you'll meet them at a social event and say, oh, hello, Carrie. What, who are you? And they'll lead with, I'm the CIO of such and such, or I'm the such leader of such and such. Don't let that be your identity. Because if you let your job become your identity, what happens when that job isn't there anymore? Who are you? So I was very, very careful to make sure that I had my, does it mean you don't work hard? Absolutely not. You have to work hard. But no one ever heard me say when they introduced me, oh, Sean, what are you? Or anything like that. You never heard in a social setting my professional role. It was, this is who I am as a person. So yeah, definitely be patient with yourself and remember you are you. You're not your job.
That is really good advice. Yeah. These days, I think people do get very wrapped up in that.
Yeah.
So great advice for
And
all of the young leaders out there.
and if there's one more piece of advice I can give for new leaders or leaders moving in roles, again, got taught this so many years ago, manager, don't hire yourself. So
Mm.
say you're very, like I said, say you're very good at the analytical part of the job. When you interview people to be part of your team, it's naturally going to feel most comfortable when the person you're interviewing and you go to hire is also a very analytical person. Well, guess what?
Mhm.
That department already has a really analytical person. Maybe you need more of a feeling person or more of a communication person. So as a hiring manager, always remind yourself, manager, don't hire yourself because you know what? You've already got you.
Mhm. It sounds like you have some components of the Myers Briggs in there. Is that something that you use during the hiring process?
I've never used Myers Briggs. I did learn recently about and I forget the name of the company, but it's called basically it's a card sorting exercise. And so you go through, there's like 150 different cards, and you go through and you're allowed to pick 10. What are the 10
Mm.
attributes that are most important? And the first time I did it, I'm like, oh, for heaven's sakes, this is going to be such a pain. I ended up falling in love with the process because to try and say, and as I've actually talked to people recently that are doing hiring, it's like, okay, well, what are the attributes that you need in the person you're about to hire? Well, I need them to, it's like, no, you don't just need the professional skills. Of course you need that, but do you need them to be team focused? or do you need to be customer service focused, or what are the characteristics? And it heads down a very different path for recruitment once you've picked out of these 180 traits or whatever. Well, here are the 10 that are most important to me. Like, you put them right on the job posting, you put them on the script when you're doing your interviews, and you should be structuring some of your content in the interview around those traits. Give me a give me an example of a customer service success you've had. And even though I hate the what color would you be, I also do like to hear, okay, we've all had customer service failures at some time in our life. How did you respond? Every single person has had one. How did you respond to it? But again, you wouldn't know to focus on customer service if that wasn't one of the traits that you'd picked up for hiring. And maybe this job has nothing to do with customer service. Maybe it really is. I need detailed mathematical analysis skills, like a data scientist. Doesn't need to be really good at customer service. Okay, so learn, be conscious about deciding the traits that are important for a position before you hire for it.
Yeah, it sounds like sort of a values exercise.
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. Oh my goodness. I could talk to you all day, Sean. There's so much material. Thank you for everything you've shared. Is there anything else you want to share that we didn't cover
I don't think so.
before I let you go?
I think we talked about all the things that make the most sense to share. I will say thank you for giving me this opportunity. Like I said, I'm a raging extrovert, so the chance to speak is important to me. And so thank you for the opportunity to come and be one of the people discussing on your podcast.
Awesome. Well, it was a pleasure to have you. And we'll definitely put in the show notes how to get in touch with you if people are
Wonderful.
interested in following up and asking you more questions. So thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it.
Great day, Carrie. Thank you very much.
We're happy you joined us for Suits and Sneakers. If you want to be an expert guest, look for the link in the show notes. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify or YouTube.